All right, it's time to get into the long-awaited The Idaho 4, An American Tragedy by James Patterson and Vicky Ward. This is the new book that just dropped today, July 14th, 2025, ahead of the trial of Bryan Kohberger. Now, that trial of Bryan Kohberger is not going to happen because Bryan Kohberger has changed his plea to guilty before going to trial that was scheduled for August. And so now we know that trial is not going to happen. This book was written in preparation for that, oddly enough timed just a couple weeks before they started seating the jury, which makes it a very suspicious timing. Now, we're going to talk a little bit today about the intro to this book, and we're going to get into chapters 1 and 2 on my first series. This is a book series that I do. I've done this before with When the Night Comes Falling by Howard Bloom, and now we're going to do it with the Idaho 4, An American Tragedy. I also do long form videos on all the documentaries that come out about Bryan Kohberger, and this is a little bit weird as we go into this one because, again, these books were going to be interesting to see how things played out in the court as compared to the books and the documentaries that were coming before it. But since there's going to be no trial, there's going to be no court to see, we have to then just go to discovery and find out what happens when the gag order is lifted, if it ever is lifted, for us to be able to see whether or not these narratives fit what is lifted in the gag order. So this book right here, we're going to dive into it. Again, it's a long form video. I'm going to put it in a book series that's a playlist, so you can follow just this playlist if you want, or you can follow all of my Idaho 4 content if you want. I've got several different ways that you can follow the content. Let's get right into it. So first thing I want to do is I want to start out, before we get too far into this, and a little bit about who James Patterson and Vicky Ward is. We're going to go to James Patterson first. I'm just going to show you some brief things. Most people know who James Patterson is. He's an extremely well-known fiction writer, 425 million copies. He's the first person to sell 1 million ebooks. He was listed in 2016 as Forbes' highest paid author for the third consecutive year, with an income of $95 million a year. His total income over the decade has been estimated over $700 million. So Patterson is an extremely prolific fiction writer. Now, here's a point I wanted to point out real quick. His reception. Patterson has been criticized for co-authoring many of his books, many being more of a brand that focuses on making money than an artist who focuses on his craft. Patterson, in his later years in particular, has done a lot of books with other people, lending his name, James Patterson, as his super famous, super popular, multi-million-dollar award-winning fiction writer to whatever book comes along. So now it's Vicky Ward's time on this. Now, however, I want to say Vicky Ward is no slouch. We'll look at her credentials next, who Vicky Ward is, if you don't know. I didn't know a lot about Vicky Ward, and I should have, but we're going to look into her in just a moment. But keep in mind, he's been criticized before by lending his name, Patterson, to other people to launch their careers or make them something special. Patterson doesn't really need to launch Vicky Ward's career. She's actually an investigative journalist. Patterson's a fiction writer. So I think, and he even starts out this book, when we get into it, he starts out by saying that this reads like a work of fiction. That's Patterson's influence on Vicky Ward's journalism. This is the way I think this relationship happens in this book. Vicky Ward is the researcher. She's the one that did the boots on the ground work, along with Patterson a little bit, because I believe that Patterson did reach out to some of the families. I've heard some of that behind the scenes on other interviews and stuff like that. So Patterson wasn't involved, but the real research, I think, was done by Vicky Ward. James Patterson is lending his fiction writing, storytelling credibility to the book to make it a good read. And as he says in the beginning of the book, this will read like a work of fiction. However, it's all based on facts. Now, I just thought this was anything. I'm a huge Stephen King fan, and so it was interesting to find out in an interview for USA Weekend, Stephen King said that Patterson was a terrible writer, but he's very successful. King also implied, when he asked on The Late Show and Stephen Colbert about how many hours it takes him to write a book, that Patterson needed only 12 hours to write to write 2 books. So Stephen King doesn't have a lot of respect for James Patterson. He thinks he's just a crack author that pumps out books left and right. As other people would say, however, the number of readers they have, they used to say that 50 million people, Elvis Presley fans, couldn't be wrong, that he had to be a great performer because 50 million fans can't be wrong. James Patterson also has 50 million fans, or more of his books. He's sold more than 230 million books, so fans can't be wrong. In other words, it's which comes first? Is he a great author or is he a crack author? Well, the numbers speak for himself. Everybody reads his shit, so he must be pretty good at what he does. So again, let's look into Vicky Ward quickly. This is Victoria Penelope Jane Ward. She's a British-American author, investigative journalist, editor-at-large, television commentator, CNN reporter, senior CNN reporter, and former magazine and newspaper editor with the New York Times bestseller. She's also, Prior to moving to the U.S., Ward was a columnist and featured for The Independent, a British newspaper. The New York City has featured articles in New York Post. She's worked as a contributing editor of Vanity Fair, a columnist for the Evening Standard. She's been in the Huffington Post, Huffington Post Highline. In July 2019, she was named CNN's senior reporter. She covered the Jeffrey Epstein trial and Ghislaine Maxwell. That's one of her famous things, is her work with Ghislaine Maxwell, the madam of Jeffrey Epstein. She's also editor-at-large of Town and Country magazine, wrote investigative long-form articles for Esquire. She's contributed to Financial Times, New York Times, London Times, Sunday Times, Daily Telegraph, UK Spectator magazine, British Vogue, US Harper Bazaar, blah, 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 blah. CNBC, Bloomberg, MSNBC. In other words, she's a well-known, respected long-term journalist, and she does investigative journalism. So we have a hope that when she does her research, she's done well on her research and vetted things because she's experienced as a journalist. Patterson, not so much. Patterson's a fiction writer. He's lending his name to the book, in my opinion. Here's some of the books that she did. New York Times bestseller, Devil's Casino, The Liar's Ball, which is being made into a movie, and so on. Here's what it talks about her 2019. She said her 2003 profile of Jeffrey Epstein in Vanity Fair had included on-the-record accounts of individuals who had first filed the earliest complaints against Epstein. During her investigation into Epstein, she was threatened and her child was threatened. She backed out some interesting foods for thought. Her most recent work in 2022, The Killing of the Idaho 4 Students, the Idaho 4 American Tragedy, co-authored with the best-selling novelist James Patterson, is going to be published today. So here it is. Here we go. Okay, let's get right into this. In case you're not familiar with how this series goes or how the book series goes of mine, I read through the entire book front to back, chapter by chapter, and I do recordings. Tend to make them targeted around 35 minutes to an hour. Somewhere in that wheelhouse is my bite-sized chunks. In fact, I usually put a timer on, and I kind of need to put that timer on now, just kind of keep an eye where I'm at. So I'm looking at the timer now. Let's get started. This is, again, the Idaho 4 American Tragedy, based on hundreds of exclusive interviews, the definitive account of the murders of 4 unforgettable college students by a cold-blooded killer. So we'll see how this goes. A lot of times these things are kind of hit pieces, but we'll see. James Patterson, Vicky Ward. We're going to jump right into the author's note. That's where we're going to start. And I highlight sections. I read some of these highlighted sections, and then I comment on them with my food for thought. So it's kind of like a audiobook on steroids. I don't read every single word. That would probably be too much of a copyright infringement, but I am adding my own take. Therefore, it's protected under fair use in America because I'm adding my own analysis to it. All right. This book reads like fiction, but none of it is made up. Every detail in the pages have been meticulously sourced through interviews or has been factually documented. Now, right off the bat, I would say that I say the same thing of my own content, right? Is that I research things. I'm not just pulling shit out of my ass. So the question about how factual it is, it may be that we read facts, but the facts themselves may be wrong. For example, facts that are in the PCA, for example, that later were found under examination and cross-examination on the stand, turned out to have some inaccuracies in the PCA. And so therefore, the probable cause affidavit, in case you're not familiar with the PCA term. So therefore, when a researcher like Vicky Ward, and again, I think most of this book is basically researched by Vicky Ward, and James Patterson is just lending his name to it and helping with the creative writing process of it. So when she does something like quotes from or uses the PCA, the probable cause affidavit, it may be factual that was stated in the PCA. What may not be factual is that what was stated in the PCA is actually a fact. It could have been lied and fixed under a cross-examination, as someone says, is it really true what you wrote in the PCA? No, it's not. So the question will be is how good of research did Vicky Ward do? We're going to try to find that out. Of course, it says here, of course, he is innocent until proven guilty. So that's a nice thing to see in a book, that we're going to not necessarily automatically assume that Bryan Kohberger is guilty from the beginning. But again, now the funny and the irony thing is Bryan Kohberger has already pled guilty to these things as of the date that this book is published. So when I say it's good that they're not, this book was written well before Bryan Kohberger pled guilty. They should have been presuming that Bryan Kohberger was innocent until proven guilty. That's the way it should have been done. This book could not have been written without the help and the support of hundreds of people, including 320 individually interviewed, sometimes many times, by Vicky Ward. This, again, is my take to show you the majority of this book, the actual research, the hands on the boots on the ground, if you will, was Vicky Ward. She's the one that did the research. She interviewed 320 individuals, sometimes multiple times. So again, I feel like her credentials are good. She's a good investigative journalist from what I've seen. She's won awards, so we hopefully will be able to trust that she's not making shit up, like maybe Howard Bloom, When the Night Comes Falling, may not have been as well vetted as this. I want to read you some of the people that are highlighted as thanks, and so we can kind of know what to look forward in this book. Moscow, Idaho Police Chief James Fry, now retired, generously gave his time and shared his insights on dealing with the most horrific crime of his career amid worldwide media scrutiny. Importantly, he did this without the discussion of any specifics in this case, an investigation per the gag order put in place by a local judge. So again, there is an unprecedented gag order that still exists to this day. In a few days, it looks like we're going to have that lifted a little bit. So some of the documents that have been sealed up to this date are now going to be basically opened up for the public to take a look at. I'm excited about that. We're all excited about that. That should be happening while we're reading this book series. So it'll be interesting to compare some of the stuff that's coming out that maybe wasn't available to Vicky Ward or maybe was just rumors. But again, Chief Fry allegedly was keeping to the gag order and did not provide any information that hasn't already been released to the public. That's something to keep in mind. All right. So, and then I've always been curious about the local judge who put in the gag order in the first place. I've always been curious to do a little research. I can't believe after all these years, I've never really researched judge who put in the unprecedented gag order in the first place. And when Judge Hippler, Stephen Hippler, took over the case later on, he thought the first judge in this case had basically gone too far with putting in a gag order. He had gone over the top. And so Hippler started to release some of the documents over time that the first judge had sealed. So it leads to the question, why did the first judge seal stuff so much? Hopefully we can get into that in this book. We probably won't. I should dive into that later and share that. I just wanted to get that out front. The supporting details are drawn from public documents, including court records. So I do this as well. And my YouTube channel, I look at public documents and court records. I break those down all the time. I've got deep dives into court documents all over my website. So I'm doing the same kind of stuff Vicky Ward is. The difference between me and Vicky Ward, well, there's many differences between me and Vicky Ward, but I didn't go interview anybody. That's where I fail short. I don't want to knock on people's doors and start asking people to talk. I feel creepy about it, and I didn't want to broach that area. And so Vicky Ward has journalistic credentials. She can get away with interviewing people that would never give me the time of the day. So I just leave it a go. I just focus on the public documents. Thanks also to Kathy Mabbitt, the Moscow coroner. So we know that the coroner was investigated or talked to Vicky Ward. The question is, did Kathy Mabbitt give any information to Vicky Ward that was somehow a violation of the gag order? Because early on, Kathy Mabbitt gave details about the crime, about the wounds to some of the victims, to the families involved in this, but then nobody's talked about it ever since. We haven't heard shit from Kathy Mabbitt. Did Vicky Ward get Kathy Mabbitt to open up about things, and would that have been a violation of the gag order? We're going to find out in this book, hopefully. So, and she also thanks retired police officers Paul Kwiatkowski and Brannon Jordan at the University of Idaho, thanks to the Dean of Students, Blaine Eccles, as well as Kelly Quinnant and Bruce Pittman. And also a thanks to the guys at Sigma Chi fraternity. So it's interesting that the fraternities are part of the conspiracy theories surrounding this whole thing. There's a lot of conspiracies about what was happening at the frat life, the sorority life, and there's a special thanks to the guys at a frat. So that's interesting to just keep in mind when we're going through this book. Now, Moscow, Idaho Police Chief James Fry, well, we already covered that. Sorry, I thought I had pushed the next button. They also thank Christ Church pastor Doug Wilson, which is interesting. In the first book, we heard about the Kirkers, a group of individuals who are very religious in Moscow, Idaho, and their fallout with the police department and their run-ins with the local police over masking of coronavirus, COVID situation. That is maybe outside the purview of this book. We'll wait. If it comes up in here, we'll see. But it's interesting that they thank Pastor Doug Wilson and Nate Wilson, his son, Mark Tribblepiece, the owner of the Corner Club. That's an interesting name to call out. I had in the previous book that I reviewed, I said, everything in this case, I believe, revolves around what happened that night at the Corner Club. Now it looks like Vicky Ward in this book has interviewed the owner of the Corner Club. Will they provide any new information that we don't already know? I'm super excited to find out about that. All right. Then we're going to get into the prologue, chapters 1 and 2 of the prologue, I guess. Is it the prologue and then chapters? Yeah, I guess. 1 and 2 are the prologue. Wenatchee, Washington, November 13th. So I just wanted to state, by the way, this is a weird aside, as I'm hesitant to do this. Wenatchee, Washington, currently right now is involved in another, in roundabout way, in another high-profile case, which is that of Travis Decker, an individual up in the area of Wenatchee who allegedly killed his 3 daughters and has been on the run since about a month or so ago in Leavenworth at a park in the area near Wenatchee. I have friends in Wenatchee. I was planning on kind of getting into that case a little bit because Travis Decker's still on the run. The only reason I bring it up in this roundabout way is 2 reasons. One, because Fry is at the chief of police. Fry is at Wenatchee when he gets the phone call about the murders. The very first phone call he receives, he was up vacationing, visiting a friend in Wenatchee. I have friends in Wenatchee, so I know the area. And the Travis Decker case recently. Travis Decker, again, on the run currently for the murder of 3 of his children. He's a military guy. He's trained in combat, trained in survival, and has been on the run for quite a while. There are some new rumors coming out on YouTubers who have large followings who are suggesting that Travis Decker may have been involved in the Idaho 4 murders. I in no way am saying that I believe that Travis Decker is involved in the Idaho 4 murders. I almost hesitated to mention it, other than, again, I can't pass up when I'm talking about Wenatchee, Washington, that that's close to home, and that's where Travis Decker's from. And there's this new theory that's starting to surface, and I think it doesn't have teeth. I really don't think it has teeth, but I'm still interested in the Travis Decker case. So, oh my God, we will get through this. I assure you, promise you. All right, it's Sunday, so this is the 13th of November. This is in the afternoon. This would be somewhere, I believe, around 1 o'clock-ish that Fry is going to get a call. The murders were discovered somewhere around noon-ish, we'll say. And then Chief Fry gets the phone call when he's out of town in Wenatchee. I believe it'll be around 1 o'clock. It's Sunday, and Fry's about an hour into the 4-hour drive back. So he's driving back from Wenatchee. It takes 4 hours. You're going to find a timestamp later on that says that a person is going to arrive at 4 p.m. He's already been on the road for an hour. That makes me think that it happened around noonish, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, sometime around that time that this phone call happens. The common assumption about small-town police chiefs is that they have no experience with murder, but it's not Fry's first brush with homicides on campus. Now, let's talk about this real quick. In 2007, when he was still a sergeant, he worked on 3 homicides in just 1 year involving a University of Idaho student, David Boss, who was shot by a former classmate. In 2011, as a lieutenant, Fry oversaw an investigation of another university tragedy. That summer, psychology professor Ernesto Bustamante, who had a history of mental illness, fatally shot Katie Benoit, a 22-year-old graduate student he'd previously dated, outside her home, and then later turned the gun on himself. So there's been some homicides that now Chief Fry has been involved with in the past around the Idaho campus. But the big one that's going to come out in this chapter, and the one I want to focus on, is a Greek drowning, suspicious drowning. And the reason I bring this up is because the book focuses on that drowning. And I think the reason being is because there's been rumors on the internet for a long time that there was other murders going on campus. This isn't the only murder, murder scene, these 4 individuals murdered in the house. And it's not the only one that murders that is involving fraternities. So some have long suspected the suspicious circumstances in which a fraternity brother was found drowned in a very shallow creek, is what the wording was. And that has been a subject of contention for quite some time. Here we're going to hear about a frat person who fell and died near a shallow creek. And I believe it's the same story. And it is interesting because I think the reason why it's highlighted in this book isn't just to show that Chief Fry has had experience with murders around the area or suspicious deaths. This one's going to be called a suspicious death. And the circumstances are going to make total sense, in my opinion. But the point being is that I think they're addressing it because that has been one of the early speculations in the Idaho 4 murders, is that this is all revolving around fraternities and murders around fraternity people, payback around murders around fraternity people. And I think that's why this story is focused on. So let's get into that a little bit. So So Fry knows that this is going to be different. He knows this is going to test the department in an unprecedented way. He knows that this is too big for Moscow to handle without help. And so automatically he says he's going to need support from the state, probably the FBI. It's not his job, it says, to run point at the scene of a crime. When he was a detective, which was not so long ago, he headed up investigations. But now he's chief. And as the chief, and chiefs who get in the way of their teams can really screw things up. His role today is to stay in close contact with his officers, provide whatever support is needed. So again, Chief Fry is now in a new role. He's not going to be taking lead. Somebody else is going to be taking lead. So he starts giving directions over the phone, making sure that the team is doing all the right things. Have you reached Bill is one of the first questions that is asked. Bill Thompson. This is an interesting background information between Chief Fry and Bill Thompson. I'm not saying it's suspicious. It's stuff that we want to pay attention to as we move forward. Have you reached Bill, he asked, referring to veteran county prosecutor Bill Thompson, who has never lost a case. This is a big thing. Never lost a case. In their parallel careers, the chief and the prosecutor have worked every crime scene together. They meet every single day at 8 a.m. Fry's belief in Thompson, the only prosecutor in Idaho who has ever won a murder conviction in the absence of a dead body, is unwavering. This was why people have said Bill Thompson was a legend in Idaho. He actually got a murder conviction on somebody that didn't even have the body of the victim, and he still managed to get a conviction of a murder conviction on somebody that they didn't even have a body. And a lot of people say, how can you have a conviction of a murder when you don't even have the body? This is what made Bill Thompson a legend, and he's never lost a case. And first thing you want to know is Bill Thompson on this case. Forensics, we're going to need to know from forensics, the two forensic officers, Lawrence Mowry and Andrew Fox, are Fry's appointments. He asks about the state, because the state's going to have forensics called in. A scene as big as this will need help from the Idaho State Police forensics team based in Lewiston, about 30 miles south of Moscow. On their way is what the response is. Who have you got there at the scene? Barrett tells him, that's who's on the phone with him, Barrett tells Fry that Mitch Nunez was the first officer on the scene. So we're just establishing the order of events. Much of this stuff has already been out there. With some of this stuff we already know, but it's still important for us to get the details as we move forward. At this, Fry blanches. My heart broke, he said later. His 37-man department runs like a family. 22-year-old Nunez is like a son to Fry, a baby. So this young cop, he's basically going to say, is never going to forget what he's going to see that day. He feels bad that the first person on the scene at a quadruple homicide is going to be this young cop who he views as a son. Where's Brett Payne is one of the next questions that Fry asks. 2 months prior, Fry had promoted Brett Payne, a 32-year-old cop and military veteran, whom he hired in 2020 to detective corporal, a new position in the department that Fry created for a reason. Ordinarily, detectives are the higher rank of a sergeant. Now, I've got a whole video about Brett Payne and his role in the 82nd Airborne, same exact unit, same exact combat unit that Brent Kopacka served in. Brent Kopacka would later be shot and killed in Pullman, Washington, 1 month and a day after the murders of the Idaho 4, and many suspicions have been revolving around Brent Kopacka and whether Brent Kopacka might have been involved in the Idaho 4 murders. Lots and lots of stuff to unpack there. Too much for this right now, but what we do know is, again, Brett Payne, who was promoted to this special role, was also in the same combat unit as Brent Kopacka, which has led many people to have questions. I've got a whole video on it if you want to watch that. Maybe I'll link it in this video for you to watch if you are interested in that story. Now, Tyson responds that yes, Payne is on his way to the crime scene. He'll be there at around 4 p.m. All right. Fry is aware of the importance of locking down an investigation, keeping information on a need-to-know basis to stop leaks that could jeopardize it. He and Bill Thompson are completely in sync on this. Thompson never speaks to anyone about an investigation until he gets to sentencing, and even then he keeps it short. So Bill Thompson probably isn't going to give us shit even after the sentencing. Bill Thompson didn't give us shit certainly in the courtroom when he was reading what the state was going to provide against Brian Kohberger, and he's probably not going to give us shit after, because that's just his MO. And Bill Thompson was probably one of the lead people in the early part of this investigation who pushed for an unprecedented gag order. Tell nobody anything. That's Bill Thompson. That's how Bill Thompson rolls. Does that, by the way, one has to ask, does that lead to why Bill Thompson never loses a case? Because he seals things down, he puts everything under gag order, he doesn't talk to anybody, and develops his case without anybody knowing anything about anything. Is that part of the reason why Bill Thompson never loses a case? I don't know. Just interesting to know. Barrett shared with Fry that a knife sheath was found in one of the rooms, and it's imperative this doesn't get out. So that was early on. Chapter 2, and this is the last one we're going to cover before we finish this particular episode of our book series. All right, 1 hour later. Take January 22nd, 2013, nearly a decade ago, he'd been a lieutenant. This is talking about Chief Fry on a previous murder investigation in 2013. A couple had shown up at the station wondering anxiously where their son was. A Latah County Sheriff's deputy had found a body the next day and called it in. The corpse had been on the ground for 2 days. It looked like a college student named Joseph Wyderick had frozen to death. He'd been intoxicated. By the way, this isn't, as I reread it, this isn't the story of the other drowning victim. Another, I don't believe this is the same story as another drowning victim of a frat that happens closer to the murders. I think this might be a different one, or it might be the same one. Fuck, now I'm getting my own thing mixed up. I think the story, however, just like I said at the beginning, I think the story, the reason why this is highlighted so much to explain what happened to this frat brother in 2013, it was a mysterious death that people have related to. This is all related. The frats are out of control. The frats murder people all the time. The frats cover things up all the time. This hit on the house is a fraternity sorority thing gone bad, and the kids are lying because murder is something that they do. And I think that's why this story is highlighted. So let's just follow the story to see if it makes logical sense that it could have happened in a non-suspicious way. Notifying parents of the loss of their children is something you never get better at, and tragically, student deaths are not unusual. That's important. Student deaths are not unusual, not in Moscow and not in Pullman. They happen a lot. There's one practically every semester. So at least 2 semesters every single year, because they're not on a quarter basis at WSU, they're at a semester basis, and probably at U of I as well. Every semester is 2 semesters, and somebody dies. So that's like 2 people a year. Students die at 2 a year, almost every single year. That's what they're basically saying. Typically, it's the result of a car accident that occurs during the long drive most of the kids take cross-state in treacherous conditions in the winter. By the way, as a quick aside, I was going to WSU. I drove home to a place called the Tri-Cities from Pullman, Washington in my car on a long trip in the winter, and did a 360 in oncoming traffic, saw my life flash before my eyes as I spun around, watching cars coming at me and cars going away and cars coming at me, and slid in between 2 telephone poles, tore all the wheels off my car and ended in a ditch. I was a college student. That kind of stuff happens all the time. I was one of the lucky ones. Kids die on the road, those back roads in icy conditions all the time. So they're not always mysterious deaths, but yes, deaths happen all the time in that area. Again, at the rate of maybe 1 every semester. Now, this is, again, going to the story, the tragedy of young Joseph Wyderick, a double whammy for Fry, because it seemed like no one in the community helped the kid out by notifying law enforcement that he was in trouble on the night that he ended up dying. His body was found 2 miles from town. When all the details about Wyderick's final night were in, and when Fry put together a map for Joseph's mom, Michelle, it emerged that Joseph walked a circuitous 8 miles before laying down to rest one last time. Various people in town did see the kid. They could have helped him by calling MPD, Moscow Police Department, when he stumbled into their backyards, or in a few cases into their homes. Instead, they just watched him or sent him on his way. One lady later said, "I just didn't want to get him in trouble. He was underage. He was drunk and underage. A lot of people think they're doing college kids a favor by not calling the police and getting young kids in trouble for drinking. They're just kids. Their drinking is what they do." So when this kid's stumbling around in freezing conditions and later essentially freeze to death, dies of exposure, whatever the case may be, a lot of people turn a blind eye because he's just a drunk kid. They don't want to call the cops and get him in trouble for being drunk. So the tragic story of Joseph Wyderick that he put together was something like this. On January 20th at 2 a.m., a Moscow woman hears a noise downstairs. She goes to take a look. Is it an animal? It's a human, a drunk human. An 18-year-old man, clearly disoriented, smelling of alcohol, his blonde hair disheveled, is stumbling around in her basement. She doesn't know how he got in, and he's lost. Safe, he mumbles to her. It's clear he wants to stay and sleep it off. He's freezing, he's cold, he's drunk, he stumbles in to get some shelter and wants to sleep somewhere. But she asks him to leave. He'll figure something out. And no, she didn't need to call the police because she doesn't want to get the poor kid in trouble. It's black outside. Snowdrifts are piled high, but students often wander drunk, a nuisance with their noise and their parties. Joseph shuffles down Highland Drive. 3 a.m. Bang, bang. He's knocking on another door. This one, a Mountain View Road. The owner looks through the window. Go home, he says to the kid. Again, there's no call to the police. The townsfolk think they're protecting the young underage drinker. It's a mistake. That's what the book says. 4 a.m. Bang, bang. A third homeowner looks out the window, shrugs, and goes back to bed. Joseph wanders away. He's trying to get back to his dorm, but he has no idea where he's headed. Somehow, he ends up at Paradise Creek, 2 miles north of the city. Joseph trips and falls. He hits the frozen creek. His body sinks like a dead weight through the ice into the frigid water. This is, again, where people said, how do you die in a very, very shallow creek? I've been to that creek. That's super shallow. I don't care what you say. That's a homicide. Again, this seems to be the same exact story, but it's making more sense if he's drunk, disoriented, so hammered he can't find his way back. He's walking 8 miles in a circuitous route, 2 miles out of town. He's banging on doors trying to find a place for shelter, and he stumbles and he falls into a shallow creek. It starts to make a little bit more sense. It doesn't sound so suspicious to me. He fights, he climbs out, he crawls under a nearby bridge, he rests and rests. His body is discovered by police 2 days later. It emerges that Joseph Wyderick had drunk too much at a Saturday night party given by the Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity. So again, here come again the rumors that the fraternities murder kids all the time. Hazing event gone wrong, over drinking, and then when somebody dies, the kids cover it up. That's the rumor that goes around these campuses. And by the way, when I was at Pullman, it was known as having more beer cans per capita than any place in Washington State. They drink a fuck ton at the universities, and underage drinking is a huge problem at the universities. So now Fry is going to come to look like the good guy in the situation, and in fact he may be. Let's listen to the way it's described. Fry doesn't like to toot his own horn, but he reckons that since he's become chief in 2016, attitudes in town have changed a lot about things, including over-the-top college drinking. Yes, it is over the top there. He isn't stupid enough to think that you can stop college kids from drinking, but he believes that you can take steps to keep it in check. You can, for example, go as he does to Rosar's to look at the keg list and figure out where each keg is. If a keg is somewhere it's not supposed to be, if, say, it's with a group of underage kids, you take it away. Nicely, but that's what you do. One time, Fry and the guys took 42 cases of Keystone Light away from a frat party because they saw a 19-year-old pushing the cart. So yes, you've got to teach them that the law is the law. So Fry has taken steps in his department to try to make sure that kids don't do a lot of underage drinking. And now we're going to finish the prologue with part 3 of the prologue. It's the last part of the prologue. 1122 King Road, Moscow, Idaho, 2 hours earlier. Now, there's a sequence of events that happens here, a checklist, if you will, of things that are done in what order. I'm going to read it almost verbatim because it's going to come up later in discovery when the documents are unsealed. All of this stuff is going to come out exactly what was seen because it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense even here. I'm just going to read it verbatim, have you digest a little bit of it, that we'll get into the weeds as we go along. Okay, so Officer Nunez radios police station and reaches Sergeant Shane Gunderson. He tells Gunderson, "This is serious," Nunez tells him. Gunderson snaps out of his boredom, leaps into his car, and heads for King Road. As he rides, he phones Tyson Barrett, his boss, the commander of the campus police, on call that day. Barrett says he's already sent patrol officers Smith and Warren to join Nunez, who's taping off the area around the house. All of these informational pieces are going to be important. Who was on the scene and in what order? This book's documenting it very well. We're talking about, patrol officers Smith and Warren joining Nunez, who's already on the scene. Gunderson's on his way. Barrett knows what to do, and not just because he is an experienced cop. He was the sergeant assigned to Moscow's previous famous homicide, the case of John Lee, a mentally ill man who went on a shooting spree in January 2015, killing 3 people, including his adoptive mother. But Barrett has another advantage here. He's a vandal, the name of the school's athletic team, a nickname that comes from a long ago U of I basketball team said to have vandalized its opponents. He knows the school, the students, the faculty, the administration, the culture. He's been attached to the university on and off for years. He's worked it years ago as a sergeant. His daughter is a student. Again, I'm not going to riff on that a lot right now. Just pay attention to who knows what and who's related to who in this story. It's going to maybe come up later on. When Barrett arrives, he recognizes Ava Wood. Now, Ava Wood was featured pretty heavily in the One Night in Idaho, I think it was called, the docuseries that just came out from Amazon Prime, in which Patterson, James Patterson, the author of this book, is a producer, I think, of. So Ava Wood, heavy featured in that documentary on Amazon Prime. Also mentioned here, Barrett arrives and he recognizes Ava Wood, a neighbor who's rushed out with blankets for the group of students sitting in front of the house at 1122 King Road. She already looks like she's got something going wrong. All those years of training and experience kick in. He runs through a checklist. So again, the order of which 911 calls are arriving, in the documentary, there was a moment in which Ava Wood, I think, says something about watching. Maybe it was Ava, maybe it was somebody else, maybe it was Emily, talked about paramedics arriving with their gear and not going into the house. They just stood by with their gear. I had an explanation for that at the time, and I was going to explain it. I have an explanation for it now. But again, the timing of this doesn't even seem to mention it. In this book, it almost looks like paramedics never even arrived on scene. They were sent away right away, which is interesting because, again, in the video documentary on Amazon Prime, they talk about paramedics coming out with their gear but not going into the house. I guess I will riff on that right now. In a crime scene, if they think that there might be killers still there or this crime scene is not secured, they won't necessarily let EMTs go in. Now, if there's life-saving measures that need to be done, survivors who are suffering and maybe still hanging to life, they might rush that situation along. But EMTs and ambulances, they're not required to go into a scene if it's not secured and they don't know that what's happening. They don't know if there's a killer still inside the house. And so I could imagine that police would not even allow EMTs into the house until the house is secured and they know there's no killer still inside the house. But that wasn't really covered either in this book or in the documentary. It was just a thought I had about why someone said in the video documentary that there were EMTs standing around outside with their gear but not going into the house. Why would they not go into the house? If people need to help, why wouldn't they go into the house? Well, it could be that it was an active crime scene. They were trying to figure out if there was still a killer inside the house, and therefore nobody was allowed in there but police officers. Maybe that would explain things. Anyways, all those years of training and experience kick in as he runs through a checklist. 1, clear the residence and run tape around its perimeter. Check. That had been done. Call for medical assistance if needed. There is no need. So again, at this point, whatever this checklist is, officers have gone in. Everyone they know is dead. They have no question they're dead. They don't need an EMT to come in and pronounce them dead. They know everybody's dead, period. Well, maybe because they've been dead for nearly 8 hours and there was absolutely no question that these were dead individuals. But anyways, calling for medical assistance, none needed. So moving on, secure the scene, check. Nunez had put up the tape. Barrett assigns one cop to watch the front of the house, another the back. Call in detectives who will lead the investigation. There'll be 5 detectives. John Lawrence, who is about to retire, Danny Vargas, Brett Payne, Detective Corporal, and forensics detectives Lawrence Mowry and Andrew Fox. Barrett knows it's important to call only those cops who will play essential roles. With each body comes the risk of contaminating evidence. So now we know who the detectives who were called: John Lawrence, Danny Vargas, Brett Payne, Detective Corporal, and forensics detectives Mowry and Fox. Well, some of these things, again, everybody already knows. We're just going to go through the book and detail who was there at what time for those that might still have questions about what really happened in those early hours after the bodies were discovered. Now, number 6, notify the county prosecutor, Bill Thompson. Notify police. We missed that one. Notify the police chief. That was Fry. So all these other things have been done. Notify the chief police. That's been done. Notify the county prosecutor, Bill Thompson. Notify the other Moscow PD captains, Anthony Dallinger and Roger Lanier. Then call the sergeant running Idaho State Police detectives. Moscow is going to need the state police's forensic team at a bare minimum. This is too big for MPD to handle alone. State has a forensics lab. Moscow does not. Then 9, call the university's president, provost, and dean of students. 10, call the coroner, Kathy Mabbitt, but not until all the evidence is collected. Someone might accidentally move something and contaminate the scene. And then 11, notify the public if there is a threat. So we're almost finished here. Barrett knows, not just from his years of experience, but from common sense, that the probability of some random stranger knifing 4 people to death in their bedrooms is almost nil. There's a connection somewhere between whoever did this and at least one of the victims. There always is. That's what police are going to have to find. Full stop. I 100% agree. Yes, people do commit random acts of violence. People do sometimes. There is no answer for a killer who just decides to randomly pick a victim that doesn't make sense. But generally speaking, as this paragraph says, police believed right from the beginning somebody was the target. Somebody knew somebody in the house. That's always the answer. How quickly did they rule out alternative suspects? That's going to be one of the primary questions that I have as we go through the documents and the Freedom of Information Act request to see how alibis were established. Because again, let's read that paragraph. Barrett knows, not just from his years of experience, but from common sense, that the probability of some random stranger knifing 4 people to death in their bedrooms is almost nil. There's no connection, there is a connection somewhere between whoever did this and at least one victim of the victims. There always is. That's what the police are going to have to find. Now, the latest documentaries and narrative is that connection is Bryan Kohberger to Maddie Mogen, that he was obsessed with Maddie Mogen. No connection to this day has ever been established. It's just something they just keep saying over and over and over again until you believe it. Kohberger must have been obsessed with Maddie. I believe that Kohberger was obsessed with Maddie. He may have gone to the Mad Greek restaurant and met Maddie before and became obsessed with her. All of the speculation, not one bit of it has ever been proven, but they've said it so many times now that people in the public are starting to believe that Bryan Kohberger had an obsession with Maddie, and that's the way that their answer is. There always is some kind of connection. He knew somebody in that house, and it had to be Maddie Mogen. Nothing has been established. To this day, nothing has established that Bryan Kohberger had any connection to any of the victims, including Maddie Mogen, who they repeat over and over and over again was who he must have been obsessed with. And I believe early investigators believe that Kaylee Gonzalez was the target, not Maddie Mogen. It's so weird. It is so weird to me that the media and news has completely tried to shift who the target was to be Maddie with nothing to base it on. Nothing at all. But they keep repeating it over and over again until it's just going to become part of the story that, oh yeah, Bryan Kohberger was obsessed with Maddie. There's been nothing to link those two. Yeah, I beat the dead horse sometimes. The patrol officers correctly begin with people in front of them. This is huge. Patrol officers correctly begin with people in front of them. Why is this young student, Hunter Johnson, holding a kitchen knife? What happened here? So they arrive at the crime scene. Kids are outside. A bunch of people have been brutally stabbed to death with a knife. And outside the house is Hunter Johnson holding a kitchen knife. Why? That's all they're going to say right here. We'll have to wait for later in the story to explain why Hunter Johnson was standing with a kitchen knife. Many of you may have your own speculations about no, that's the case. It's just interesting that they point that out. And then here's how they describe this. Hunter sits with the patrol officers and tells them what happened as best he knows, and they let him go. That sounds super, super quick. You arrive at a scene, 4 brutal murders caused by a stabbing, and a guy's holding a kitchen knife outside. They talk to him for a little bit and let him go. Again, we weren't involved with that interrogation, so I don't know what he said that convinced them that there's no way in hell he could have been part of the crime. But we'll get to that later, I'm sure. But the first emergency vehicle that arrives is unnecessary. It's the volunteer ambulance, the medical responder to the 911 call. It stays a couple of minutes, then at the cop's request leaves. It's too late for anyone to need medical attention, which begs the question on the documentary when someone says they saw paramedics and stuff and EMTs standing around with equipment ready to go into the house, but they don't go in. That doesn't sound like what you just hear here. It sounds like, according to this, the 911 ambulance shows up and the police sent them away, said there's no need for you. So did they get out of the car and go up to the house with EMT gear and wait around for a while? Or did he just send them away? Already, I have to question the book. All right. Hope you're intrigued. This is just getting started. Shit's going to get off the hook, I'm sure, just based on the prologue.